Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Dance Barnes, and I'm excited to have you in my general biology lab course this semester, or this summer session. And this is going to be one of the first of many guided lectures that we're going to have. And of course, we're going to also have very frequent lab discussions and meetings online, whether it be through Skype or Collaborate, and we'll start scheduling those for later in the week. But if you notice, you already have some pre-lab activities that are posted, and the first set of pre-lab activities kind of introduce you to what it means to be alive, because this is, of course, a biology laboratory course, and biology is the study of life. And so for some of the very first activities, I want you to understand what it means to be a living thing, and so, or a living organism, or what it means to be alive. And so, you should already have noticed your pre-video assignment and then your pre-activity. Your pre-video assignment is in your Characteristics of Life module. And then the actual activity you'll find in the assignment section that goes along with it. So there are detailed instructions there for you. And after you finish that activity, you've gotten to this point, which is the actual conversation about what it means to be alive. And hopefully you're already familiar with these points because you've gone through the activity. And so essentially, I'm going to walk you through a few concepts. And you see on this first slide, it says, is it alive? Breathe, you are alive. And so if you're breathing, does that mean that you're alive? And so most organisms that do undergo some form of respiration, they are alive. But first and foremost, what you're going to learn within this laboratory, that if you are alive, you are made up of cells, whether it be one cell or many cells, you are alive. If you're made up of one cell, say for instance like a bacteria cell, which is prokaryotic, and if you're in lecture, we're going to go in much more depth about that information. You're considered unicellular. But sometimes if you're alive, you can be what we call multicellular, which means you're made of many cells. And cells are the basic unit of life. It's the smallest unit of life that's considered alive. And so as you can see here, we have a paramecium, which is a single cell structure. And we have a little cute dog here, which is a multicellular organism. And they are indeed alive. And so also one of the requirements of life is that you can reproduce, which means you contain DNA and you pass that DNA down to offspring. And usually when we think of reproduction, we think of sexual reproduction, which means we're mixing up genetic material between two members of the same species. However, like with that paramecium that we just saw on that previous slide, a lot of times when we're talking about bacteria cells, they do not undergo sexual reproduction. It only consists of one individual undergoing asexual reproduction, which means there's no mixing of genetic material, and you're ending up with an offspring that is genetically identical to the parent, which means it's pretty much a clone. And so we see here examples of sexual reproduction, a sperm fertilizing an egg, and then we see this unicellular structure undergoing binary fission and making a clone of itself. And so that is asexual reproduction. And you heard me mention DNA before. And so in this reproductive process, you have the passing down of genetic material, which is DNA, which is the universal genetic code of life. And all organisms store this complex information in their cells, and they need this to ultimately live, grow, and reproduce. So all the information and details that you need for life is encompassed in that DNA. And so as you can see here, this is a double helix molecule, and we'll actually work with DNA in one of our subsequent labs where we'll learn how to isolate DNA. And so another characteristic of life is living things grow and develop. And so once you're actually born or you have those offspring, they're going to grow and develop. And they're going to basically develop into full-grown organisms that are going to undergo the same process of passing down genetic information and producing more offspring. And so growth and development is that other characteristics of life that allows you to be alive. Whether you're an animal or a plant, you grow and develop. And a very essential characteristic of life, as we try to detail these quickly, so you have a general understanding of what it actually means to be alive. So we started out with consisting of cells. Those cells contain DNA. Those cells reproduce. And then we also see that these cells can essentially use energy to undergo these processes of growth and development and reproduction. So energy is needed for all of these things. So it's important that these living systems have various biological processes that allow them to make energy. And as you see in this particular figure here, you have photosynthesis, which is the way plants make energy, and then you have the mitochondria, which allows for animal cells to make energy in the form of ATP. And so photosynthesis utilizing chloroplasts or mitochondria making ATP. The sun or light energy is the primary source of energy for all of these things. And so when you talk about any of these processes, these things essentially occur because of what we refer to as metabolism. So whether you're talking about photosynthesis or cellular respiration, these are metabolic processes. And then we have living things responding to their environment. So if you are alive, you're going to have some sort of response to your environment. So whether it's as simple as, something's hot, you pull your arm away, or if something responding to its environment for survival. And I like this really cool example here. Here's a sandfish, and it's the exact color of its environment so it can hide from predators. But this is stimulated as a response to its environment for some environmental or adaptive purpose, usually for survival. And then also maintaining a stable internal environment. So making sure those conditions inside allow that organism to essentially be in an optimal state so that it can maintain life. And so, for instance, if you sweat, this is necessary when you get too hot because it allows you to release some of that heat and to cool. Sensations such as thirst and hunger, that lets your body know that you need certain things to live. And so this requirement of life is something that we call what we refer to as homeostasis. This is where living things are trying to maintain a stable internal environment. And so as you can see here, these are showing you various types of cellular processes. So these little round cells are across the top of animal cells, and it's showing you that if, say for instance, the solute concentration inside the cell gets too high, water is going to want to go inside to dilute that cell. And if too much water goes inside, it's going to cause the cell to lyse or burst. And the opposite is the case if you have too much salt on the outside of the cell. Water is going to want to leave the cell and cause the cell to shrink. So with animal cells, you want this optimal situation where it's just enough water on inside and out to keep the cell in good condition. Plant cells are a little bit different, where they actually like more water on the inside. So you see typically it likes to be a little bit more turgid, where it contains a lot more water on the inside so that essentially it can have that water to for photosynthetic processes to hold its nutrients. And when environmental conditions get too hot and it's losing water, or have that water to fall back on because it has a surplus. So when we start thinking about all these processes or mechanisms that are responsible for life and all these characteristics that we talked about thus far, one of the really big ones that we almost sometimes forget about, but everything kind of goes back to it, is this whole concept of evolution. If you are alive over many years in the process of trying to adapt to your environment, living things are going to evolve. And so this is another essential basic aspect of life, that over time you will evolve to adapt to your environmental situation. And so, as you can see, there are several items that I have here. Specimen 1, which is a feather. Specimen 2, which is fire. Specimen 3, which is a bean. Specimen 4, which is yeast. And then a bonus one of the virus. We're going to, during our conversation this week, we're going to talk about if these things are living or alive and why or why not. So you can start formulating some of these questions and looking into this information before we have this conversation. And so I'll be posting times that we'll be meeting, and it'll be a couple during the week to make it conducive for everybody to meet at some point in time. But I've enjoyed going over this first bit of material with you. And don't forget, there's a discussion board out there. So if you have questions, comments, or concerns, you can post things on the discussion board. And you can do it via written format, or you can actually do a podcast format as well if you want people to see who you are. But I'm signing off, and hopefully I'll be talking to you guys soon.